The Chicago Bears don't need to draft Boise State running back Ashton Jeanty in the first round. This year's draft class, and down here at the Senior Bowl in particular, there are a bunch of dynamic running back options that would be great fits in Ben Johnson's Chicago Bears offense.
You are Locked On Bears, your daily Chicago Bears podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
This is Locked On Bears, and I'm your host, Lauren Cox. I'm here to bring you your daily, in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. You can follow me on Twitter at CoxSports1, and you can follow the podcast at Locked On Bears on TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and the Locked On Bears YouTube channel, where you can keep up with all of our video podcasts as well. Thanks for making Locked On Bears your first listen today. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by PrizePicks. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL and use our promo code LockedOnNFL to get $50 instantly when you play $5. On the show today, we take a look at some NFL draft prospects down here at the Senior Bowl in Mobile, Alabama, particularly ones that would be good fits in Ben Johnson's offense. Of course, we're going to talk about some running backs, not named Ashton Jeanty, because Jeanty's not down here, but some other dynamic playmakers that really stood out on this first day of Senior Bowl practices. Then we'll get to the big position of need, the offensive line. Some bigger names that didn't really stand out, and some lesser names that started to make a name for themselves. Guys who might not be in the mix for the 10th overall pick, but certainly the Bears' second and third round picks. Could be some quality guards and centers available for them there. And I also want to touch on a couple of tight ends and a couple of receivers, and we might sneak peek at some defensive linemen, but we'll talk more about the defense for Dennis Allen on tomorrow's podcast. But I want to start with the running back position because, A, it was a group that really stood out at practice on Tuesday, but B, it's a position that I think we see more and more Bears fans getting excited about the idea of, could they take Ashton Jeanty with the 10th overall pick? You know, he's the best running back in this draft class, clearly the best running back in the nation, someone who I thought probably should have won the Heisman. I mean, I'm not here to rehash the Heisman debate, right? But definitely a Heisman caliber running back. And it's easy to see someone like Saquon Barkley thriving for the Eagles and feel like, oh my gosh, what if the Bears could get that in Ashton Jeanty? And I think Ashton Jeanty is a great prospect. I think he's going to be a great NFL player. I think he would be an upgrade for the Bears and for just about any team that drafted him. And we don't have to go through the whole running back value argument here, but the point being, this is a good running back class that goes beyond Ashton Jeanty, and you can get good players later in the draft that maybe aren't Ashton Jeanty, but are really quality guys. Like one of the names that stood out for me today on this first day was one of the bigger names on here, Trevor Etienne, brother of Travis Etienne, the former Jaguars first-round pick, who transferred. Trevor Etienne transferred to Georgia this past season, ran really well there, and really looked the part down here at practice this week. He's not humongous. I mean, he's a little undersized, 5'8 and a half, I think, about 200 pounds. And to me, he's not the biggest, fastest, or strongest guy here, but he's just really solid. A really solid, consistent runner with good vision, sees the field well, but then was impressive to me as a receiver out of the backfield. Again, not the most explosive player in that regard, not slow either, but I'm just saying he's not wowing you with the speed per se, but it's good footwork, really good hands, and the quarterbacks came to him on checkdowns quite a bit at practice, and he looked every part a capable receiver out of the backfield. I didn't get to see him as much in pass pro drills, but someone who I think is building up some stock for himself here as a guy who checks the boxes, looks the part, and feels like a guy who can have a nice long NFL career as a part of a backfield. We know Ben Johnson from his time in Detroit would go through a lot of different running backs, whether it was this year with Gibbs and David Montgomery, or certainly in previous years with the likes of DeAndre Swift there and Jamal Williams, who both ended up going to other teams. Johnson found a way to get good backs in his backfield, and somebody like Etienne is that kind of football player. Or if you want a little bit more of a dynamic, home run speed type of threat, an explosive running back who, again, another guy who I didn't know a lot about coming into this Senior Bowl, but really impressed me, Brashard Smith from SMU. If you don't know Brashard Smith, he was previously a wide receiver at the University of Miami. Transferred to SMU this year, played running back, and I hadn't had a chance to really watch much of his tape coming down here, but you can tell he's a wide receiver. playing running back in the sense of how he runs his routes, because he runs like a running back. He has natural instincts as a runner. With the ball in his hands, because he's a great kick returner and had some long touchdowns, and you can see when he gets the ball in open space, whether it's out of the backfield or as a receiver after the catch, it's natural for him. And he was one of the first guys down here that like jumped out to me as clearly a step faster than almost everyone else. When he's running in the open field and knifing between blocks and getting past linebackers and turning the corners, like everyone else looks slow by comparison. Like it looks like he's moving at like 1.5x. You know, like if you ever fast forward a movie or fast forward a podcast, well, just not this podcast, I'm sure, but you know, where like it's not super speed like The Flash, it's just like noticeably faster than what you're used to. Like that's what Brashard Smith did today. You know, he's only 5'9", 194. You're never going to mistake him for a big bruiser who's going to run over you, but like he's good. I don't know if his 40-yard dash, like long speed, we'll see how that measures out, but it's the short area quickness, burst, explosiveness, and vision that you wouldn't expect from a wide receiver converted running back, but he looks the part. He is an offensive weapon who put him on your team and figure out later exactly how much is he going to line up in the backfield, how much is he going to line up out wide, how much is he going to be a kick returner. Like, just find ways to get the ball in his hands because it's instincts, it's speed, it's the stuff you just can't teach, and you can make him a more natural reader of blocks or whatever you want to do as far as teaching the running back nuances. Like, he's got everything else, and I'd be super excited to have him as a part of a backfield committee. Not a guy that you're going to come in and say, okay, here's the ball 25 times a game, go be a 1,500-yard running back. Like, maybe not quite that, but that's not what you would be drafting him for, and I don't think that's really putting him in the right position to be successful. If Ben Johnson does want to get a running back to add more of a pass-catching option in the backfield that maybe isn't a converted wide receiver, but someone who also stood out for me in the passing game in particular was the Michigan running back Donovan Edwards. He's a little bit bigger than these other guys we've been talking about, 5'11", 215. Again, not like humongous fullback, you know, but still, like, what he does have is 10-inch hands. And there were a couple of different passes where the quarterback is not pinpoint accurate and is swinging out to him in the flat, and he can reach out and it just sticks in his big hands. He also, I thought, was a very effective route runner with some good explosiveness on those routes. There were a couple plays where, you know, he comes out of the backfield, sizes up the linebacker, and then blows by him on a deeper route. And quarterback couldn't always hit him on those routes, but he was open, and that was the key. You know, you have to kind of separate the pass and the quarterback from just the receiver, the running back in this case, and what he was able to do as a separator. And I think he's a guy who has a lot of upside in the passing game as well, if he's not going to come in and be your lead back, because the Bears don't need somebody to come in and be the lead back. They're going to use a rotation anyway. Pair this with Roschon Johnson, with DeAndre Swift, however Ben Johnson would want to use these different running backs in this backfield. Boy, there's a lot of different guys you can like from the group down in the Senior Bowl. I'll throw in Marcus Yams from Delaware. Had a nice little game as well, especially like with no like Cam Scadabo's not down here. He ended up backing out of the process. Like, still a really strong running back class here, and it's still a really strong running back class with guys that aren't here. I would expect the Bears to use one of their picks on a running back because it's just a year to invest in that position and keep developing guys because you just can't have too many of them, and we've seen the impact that a running game like this can have for the Lions, for the Eagles, for the Chiefs, for the Washington Commanders, etc. It's a big part of this game, and the Bears would be wise to just add some kind of running back talent. And again, Ryan Poles drafts a player from the Senior Bowl in every draft class. He's drafted at least three in every draft class. So one of these guys is going to be a Chicago Bear. At least one of these Senior Bowl prospects, likely multiple Senior Bowl prospects, maybe guys we're talking about on the podcast today, especially on the offensive line. It's a good group down here. The Bears have a huge need on the offensive line, and it's something where guys might fall nicely into the Bears' draft range, even if that's not in the first round with the 10th overall pick. So we'll go through some of the good and the bad of the offensive linemen down here who started to separate themselves a little bit on the first day of Senior Bowl practices next on Locked On Bears. This episode of Locked On Bears is brought to you by PrizePicks. The big game is almost here, and there's no better way to make it even more exciting than with PrizePicks, the best place for daily fantasy sports. With over 10 million members and billions of dollars in winnings awarded, PrizePicks makes it fun and simple to get in on the action. Here's how it works. You pick more or less on at least two players' stat projections, and if you're right, you could win up to 1,000 times your cash. PrizePicks even has a free pick for the big game where one of the starting quarterbacks only needs to throw 1 yard to count as a win for your PrizePicks. So if you pair that with one more correct pick, you're cashing out right away. It's a lot of fun. It gives you something extra to root for, even if maybe you're not crazy about either of the teams in the game and you feel like, well, I don't really want either one to win. Well, you can at least have a player who you need him to get a certain amount of receiving yards or rushing touchdowns or whatever it is, and you can make some money off of those sports opinions. Download the PrizePicks app today and use our promo code LOCKEDONNFL to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Win or lose, that promo code LOCKEDONNFL is going to get you $50 instantly after you play your first lineup with PrizePicks. Run your game. The offensive line was the group down here I think I was most interested in seeing. It's the group I spent the most time watching on this first day of Senior Bowl practices. And I was surprised that the big theme here was the bigger name first-round prospects, to me, didn't stand out as above and beyond special. It's not as though they all played poorly, but like you kind of want to come down here and say, okay, like you're a first-round pick, you want to be a top 10 pick or whatever it's going to be, then look the part, right? Dominate a little bit. Be a man amongst boys. Like sometimes you see guys down here, when they step on the practice field, it doesn't take very many reps to see, oh, that guy's different. That guy's special. That guy can do some things that these other guys can't do. And I wasn't seeing that out of especially the names kind of at the top of the offensive line class. When we think about guys who could be drafted fairly early this year that are down here at the Senior Bowl, like, Ariante, I can never say these names, Ariante Ezri from Minnesota or Armand Memboul from Missouri. Like, I don't think either one was, like, terrible, but I didn't think either one dominated and stood out in a way that was like, oh, yeah, give me that guy with the 10th overall pick. I mean, Ariante Ursi from Minnesota in particular, we talked about him a little bit on yesterday's preview podcast. He's, 6'6", 330 pounds, I believe, something like that. Down here, let me double-check his measurement. I got it right here. 6'6", 339, so 340 with 34-inch arms. He is huge. He's built like an offensive tackle. He's got long arms. He looks the part of a guy that an offensive line coach is going to look at that and say, I can make him a great offensive tackle. But to me, he still looked really raw. You know, the hand placement wasn't always where it needed to be. The feet weren't always properly under him and balanced. The pad level was a little bit too high at times, and it just wasn't, for as physically imposing as he looks, technique seemed to get in the way of him being as dominant as I wanted him to be. Again, not that he was getting beat every single rep and was, like, bad, but it was like, okay, show me a special offensive tackle prospect there. And it was like, I see a special offensive tackle build, but still needs a bit more work there for me, and I think that's part of what I'm wanting to see more from him in the coming days here of practice down here. The real big winner on the offensive line for me was Gray Zabel, the offensive lineman from North Dakota State, right? Small school prospect. There's a number of small school offensive linemen who I like down here this week, but like he played at North Dakota State. He played left tackle for them. He played right tackle for them. I think he played both guard spots for them. Down here, it's all guard and center for him. He measured in with 32-inch arms. That's just generally going to be below where most teams want to see an NFL offensive tackle's arms. The arms are a little bit on the shorter side, but not a problem at guard or center. He could handle speed. I thought his feet were very, very quick, but his hands were just as quick, if not quicker, and that was the part that was most impressive to me. Like when guys would come in with their move, like he'd get their hands out of the way, and then they'd come back in, he'd be right there again. Like he could just stay like a full step ahead with his hands while also keeping the feet underneath him to balance that out. So when guys would take speed with him to try and turn around and get to the quarterback there, like he could stay with them. If they tried to bring power to him, his hands were always in the right place. Like he was surprisingly refined for a North Dakota State offensive lineman. And I thought, to me, this is a guy who may end up being the first guard/center drafted this year. I mean, it's a very real possibility as he continues to rise here. Now, that does not make him, for me, a candidate with the Bears' first-round pick at number 10. I mean, trade down from 10, and maybe we're in the conversation there, or you want to talk with the Bears' 2 early second-round picks. If he's there in that range, that to me becomes a lot more reasonable because I think he is a plug-and-play, day-one starting guard or center in the NFL that you can get in the second round and don't need to use a top 10 pick for. You can get an edge rusher, you can get a tackle there, you can do all sorts of stuff with that pick. But I think for me, for a kid coming from North Dakota State, like he looked better than some of the SEC players he was playing against and playing alongside. A couple other small school guys who also stood out, not as dominant as Zabel perhaps, but Clay Webb is a guard from Jacksonville State, and Jacob Bayer he played a lot of center from Arkansas State. And Bayer's one in particular who, if you look on Twitter, there's video of Deion Walker, the big Kentucky defensive tackle, who we'll talk about on tomorrow's podcast, who's 6'8", 350 pounds or whatever it is. There's one play in particular where he got under him and drove him back and stood him up, and it was not a good rep for Jacob Bayer, for sure. But if that's the only rep of those two players you watch on Twitter, then you think Walker had a great day and Bayer had a bad day, when I thought it was kind of the other way around. I thought Bayer had a really good day on the interior. There were other reps against Walker in those same one-on-one matchups where Bayer won. And you don't see those clips going on Twitter. And I thought Walker from Kentucky was a little bit underwhelming for me in that regard, too. A guy I wanted to see dominate. But we'll talk about him more specifically on tomorrow's podcast. Deion Walker, 6'7", 340 with a 7-foot wingspan. He's humongous. Going up against an Appalachian State center, he shouldn't have stood a chance. An Arkansas State center. He shouldn't have stood a chance. And he got beat on that one rep that was going viral on Twitter. But he did just fine against him in a bunch of other reps at practice, and I was particularly impressed with Jacob Bayer from Arkansas State and Clay Webb from Jacksonville State as other small school linemen, not second-round picks like Gray Zabel is going to be, but still guys that I think should definitely be on the Bears' radar. I want to throw one other name as far as guys who did well. Caleb Williams' college center is down here, Jonah Monheim from USC, and I thought he moved really, really well. A guy who's quick and light on his feet. In the running game, he gets to the second level. He gets off double teams really well. As a pass blocker, he got beat a couple times, so I thought he did a good job at least staying in front of guys. And then, sometimes the hands weren't always perfect where they need to be. But from a mobility standpoint, I think Monheim would be a really good fit in Ben Johnson's outside zone running scheme. If he wants to run the Bears rushing attack similar to how he ran the Lions rushing attack, I think Monheim would be a really nice fit. He could play guard or center. He's got the familiarity with Caleb Williams already as far as how he liked the ball snapped. He was at USC for 3 or 4 years. He's got some experience. He's 6'4", 307. His arms are definitely among the shortest down here. They're just 30 inches long for a 6'4" guy. Those are pretty short, but I think his movement skills help make up for the arms being an inch or two shorter than you like, because he can always be in the right place at the right time, so he doesn't need the extra inch of length to make up for, sloppy footwork or just slow footwork to get him there. Real quick, a couple negatives on the offensive line that I just wasn't in love with. Kansas left tackle Logan Brown. Again, another one of these guys built like a left tackle. 6'6", 312, almost 35-inch arms. Long, big, strong, physical. He false started a couple times. He got called for holding penalties. He got beat around the edge a bunch. He just did not have a particularly good day. And, it's day one in the Senior Bowl. It doesn't mean he's a bad prospect or whatever. Just didn't have a good day on his side. And then the Purdue offensive tackle, Marcus Mbow, I don't know how to pronounce his name. He got ran over on one of the first reps here. Just absolutely bulldozed all the way through him. And other than that, I think it was okay, but it left a bad impression to start and then never really dominated from there. For another guy that's high up in this conversation, just wasn't high up in my eyes in a game like this. But I want to, so we've got some options there as far as some tackles, mainly some interior linemen there that stood out particularly to me. But I want to dabble in a couple other positions here that, tight end and wide receiver are not big needs for the Bears. But for finding guys to fit in Ben Johnson's offense, that maybe a late-round pick to get a number 2 tight end or, a number 3, 4, 5 wide receiver in here to kind of develop and bring up in this offense over time, a couple guys out here that maybe are not household names, but you could find a steal in the 4th, 5th, 6th round that can be a contributor right away and in the long run for this Bears offense. So we'll go through a couple other skill position players, some potential weapons for Ben Johnson and Caleb Williams next on Locked On Bears. This episode of Locked On Bears is brought to you by Intuit TurboTax. Taxes was waiting and wondering and worrying if you were going to get any money back. And then waiting and wondering and worrying some more. But now Taxes is matching with a TurboTax expert who can do your taxes as soon as today. An expert who gives you their undivided attention as they work on your return while you get real-time updates on their progress so you can focus on your day. It's an expert who will find you every deduction possible and file every form, every investment, everything with 100% accuracy. Also, you can get the most money back guaranteed. No waiting, no wondering, no worries. Now this is Taxes. Get an expert now at TurboTax.com. Only available with TurboTax Live Full Service. Real-time updates only in iOS mobile app. See guarantee details at TurboTax.com/guarantees. All right, we've talked about the exciting running backs. We've talked about the all-important big need offensive line. But let's get into the luxury a little bit here of like, okay, the Bears don't need to draft a tight end. The Bears don't need to draft a wide receiver. They've got Cole Kmet. They've got Mercedes Lewis. They'll probably cut Gerald Everett tight end. But you got DJ Moore. You got Rome Odunze. You got Tyler Scott. You might have Keenan Allen. We'll see. Like, there's no need to draft other wide receivers and tight ends. The Bears have enough at those spots. But if you're sitting there in the 5th round, you're going to take best player available. It doesn't have to be position of need necessarily at that point, and you can find a role for a better number 2 tight end, a better number 3, number 4 wide receivers. You can't have too many good tight ends and wide receivers. And I thought, in particular, the tight ends were the ones that were standing out for me. Some names that you might not have heard of, but that also means you don't have to use an early draft pick to get them. Like here's one that, unless you're a diehard Nebraska Cornhuskers fan, Thomas Fidone II. He's 6'4", 241, and he looks bigger, like thicker than 241. Really wide, broad frame, and it helps him have a 6'10" wingspan at 6'4". Like, he's got these big, long arms, and he made a couple really nice hands catches away from the body, like full extension, reaching out for the ball, just gets fingertips on it, and then pulls it in and turns upfield and runs. Like, those plays were really impressive when, again, quarterback accuracy, especially on the first day, throwing to receivers they've never thrown to before, not always pinpoint. And there were a lot of balls that hit the ground, but I didn't see Fidone let any balls hit the ground, at least any that were in his general vicinity there. And to me, like, that's a guy who is not going to come in and be Cole Kmet day one, but he can get in there. I think he can hold up fine as a blocker and then add a little bit of a pass catcher upside there with decent enough size there. Like, that's one of those tight end prospects who is he ever going to be a 1,000-yard guy? Like, I don't think he's a elite athlete in that regard, but can just be a long career consistent player for you up front. Same thing with Mason Taylor from LSU, another one of like bigger tight ends down here, 6'5", 250, very similar measurements to Cole Kmet coming out of Notre Dame. You know, when he was first coming into the NFL, I want to say he's maybe the biggest tight end down here in terms of height and weight combination here. He's certainly up there with a couple of the other guys here, but another guy who looks the part, blocked well, made some nice catches. Not acrobatic catches and not like wowing you as like, holy crap, this is some super special athlete, but just like, you want a really solid tight end who can, you can rely on for checking down the ball and is going to catch it and also gives you upside as a blocker. You can work play action off of him. Like, that's a pretty nice duo there. Whereas on the downside, like Elijah Arroyo, the Miami tight end, dropped a pass that he really should have caught. Like, he looks like a good athlete, but you gotta make the easy plays, and sometimes the concentration, the focus wasn't always there with Arroyo. And I thought even the Bowling Green tight end, Harold Fenton, who we talked about a little bit on yesterday's podcast as the most productive tight end in college football this season, set a bunch of tight end records, 1,500 receiving yards, 120 catches, whatever it was. He was one of these guys where I wanted to see him come down here and like look special, right? Look like a dude who's clearly better than all these other tight ends. And I think he clearly looked like a better athlete than a lot of these other tight ends. When he's doing just like position drills by himself, where he's running routes on air, he moves more fluidly than most tight ends. I'll give him that. That was impressive. But like, I didn't see the actual like plays, right? Quarterback to tight end, makes a nice catch up the seam or down the sideline or whatever it is, a contested catch, or blow by somebody and you're wide open. Like, I just didn't see enough of that from Harold Fenton. Again, I guess I'm not watching every single rep of every single player. I can only see so much at one time. But down here, the truly special players kind of stand out, and everybody notices because, like, wow, he just made a play. Oh, he just made another play. Who made that play? Oh, the same guy. Like, they kind of separate themselves a little bit in that regard, and we didn't get to see a ton of that from him. So that's where some good and some less than stellar at tight end, and then a couple receivers I want to throw out here. I didn't spend a lot of time watching wide receivers and DBs one-on-ones. I was focused on the trenches quite a bit more, and the tight ends were kind of associated with that, and the running backs too, and the running game behind them. Wide receiver DB one-on-ones I didn't see as much of, but I thought one of the guys who was getting a lot of hype down here that I'd like to pump the brakes on a little bit is Xavier Restrepo, the Miami slot wide receiver. He's, like 5'9", 200 pounds. And I think we have a tendency among the NFL draft community that, like, anytime there's a small slot receiver that people like, they really fall in love with him and compare him to all the other ones. And, like, people were trying to compare him to Ladd McConkey last year, who had a strong Senior Bowl, goes to the Chargers, has a really strong rookie season. And I just don't think their feet and footwork and route running technical ability are at the same level. Like, yeah, they're both small slot guys who can make some plays, but, like, McConkey was uncoverable for some practices last season. And I thought Restrepo was good. Like, I'm not here to say he had a bad day. No, Restrepo had a fine day. But, like, comparatively, like, let's not make these guys the next great thing. Like, there's a defensive tackle who we'll talk about in tomorrow's podcast who everyone is comparing to Aaron Donald. It's like, he's not Aaron Donald. It's okay. He had a great day. He's not Aaron Donald. It's the Virginia Tech kid whose name escapes me off the top of my head. But we'll talk about it on tomorrow's podcast. Tomorrow we're going to talk about defense. Today we're talking about offense for Ben Johnson. Tomorrow we'll talk about defense for Dennis Allen. So I wanted to go through some of the standouts, both in the good and the bad. So Restrepo, I think a little overrated. I think he's good, but not like people are saying, wow, this is the next special slot receiver. Like, he'll be a good player. I don't know that he was like this can't miss dominant thing here. And another guy who, like, I think would be a good Ben Johnson fit here. This is not a name of a guy who's going to be a sexy pick because he's not that big. He's not the biggest. He's not small, but he's not big. He's not fast, but he's not slow. He's not an elite athlete, but he's not a bad athlete. He's kind of a jack of all trades in the middle guy who, I don't know if he's ever going to be a 1,000-yard receiver for you, but he could have a 15-year career as a really solid number 3, number 4, who's a good special teams player, who's a super, super willing blocker. Like, think about a guy who's going to do the dirty work and be a really good culture fit on your offense. Like, Ben Johnson has talked a lot in Detroit about wide receivers that block and getting wide receivers in the running game. That's part of how Tim Patrick was such a good fit in Detroit. Like, if the Bears want to find their Tim Patrick of sorts, Chimere Dike from Florida. 6 foot, 192. He's not going to wow you with the speed. He's not wowing you with the size. Like, it's not about him being a dynamic athlete. But he's going to catch the ball. He's going to get open. He's going to block. He's going to play special teams. Like, he can give you 400 or 500 yards a year. Is he going to be a special player who dominates the NFL? Probably not. You know, I'm not using a third round. I'm not using a top 100 pick on DK comparatively. But, like, man, if he's there later in the draft and you just want a solid guy who's going to stick around for a while and be one of those kind of like glue guys, like, you want 22 of these guys on your team, right? You just want, like, he's more football player than special dynamic athlete, and that's fine. Give me football players like Chimere Dike. Not to say that, like, I don't mean to, like, undersell that he's a good athlete, right? He's not slow. I don't want to make it seem like, oh, he's just some bum who's smart. Like, no, he's a good football player too, but, like, he's not on the level of some of the other more uniquely dynamic, explosive athletes, but he's a good player, and I think he'd be a good fit in this Bears offensive system. I'm really looking forward to going through some of the guys that are going to be good fits in Dennis Allen's defensive system on tomorrow's podcast, because I also had a chance to talk to Ross Jackson from Locked On Saints about Dennis Allen's defense. That's going to be Friday's podcast, where we're going to really get the scoop on the type of personnel Dennis Allen likes, the ways they develop players, and what his scheme looks like from a coverage standpoint, from a blitzing standpoint, from a pass rush standpoint. We're going to get the real in-depth stuff on Dennis Allen coming up later this week on Locked On Bears as well. So you got to make sure you hit the subscribe button on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts, because that's going to be the best way to keep up with all of our daily, in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. Thanks for making Locked On Bears your first listen today. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every single day. If you're looking for a second listen, you can check out Locked On NFL. Comes out twice a day with Tony Wiggins, who's down here. I'm hanging out with Tony Wiggins later tonight, actually. And Tyler Rowland from in the morning. They do Locked On NFL. We got Locked On Podcast for all of your favorite shows. Locked On NFL Draft if you want more draft talk. But Locked On Bears will still be here for you every single day, whether it's here in Mobile. I apologize for the background noise and just the general slightly lower audio quality. Or if it's back in the home studio. Either way, we're still going to find a time for you to bear down. I always do that and hit the wrong button, but I'm gonna nail the dismount this time and leave this all in. I'm gonna find a time for you to bear down.